All right. Welcome to our webinar on getting started with working with the DOD. I'm Matt from AFworks, and we have Olga Pogoda from KRNLS and Chris Millard from Donnelly-Boland. And Jane, I can't see if anybody's in the audience yet. Should we wait, or do we get started right away?
Great question, Matt. It always takes a couple seconds for people to filter in, but I do see the audience growing here, so you are good to get started.
All right. In that case, thank you. Let's get started. Olga has more experience in working on the contracting side, and we'll be covering things like GSA and responding to RFPs and becoming a prime or a subcontractor with the Department of Defense. And while Chris has extensive experience with SBIRs and managing that whole process, he's going to cover both all of the steps necessary to get started, as well as the sort of back of the envelope math as to whether or not it even makes sense for your company and the stage that you're at. So without further ado, Chris will take it away.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt. Thanks everyone for being here. Really appreciate having this opportunity. So a quick agenda for today. I know we have about an hour. We can try and get through this as quickly as possible so that we leave a good amount of time for Q&A at the end. Very interested to know sort of who's in the audience and what your current growing pains or hurdles are. We're going to go through an introduction of Olga and mine's background, kind of speaking towards what Matt said about, our experience, my experience on the SBIR side, Olga a little bit more on the sort of larger GSA and manufacturing side. It sounds like from our RSVPs, we have a mix of some high growth startup teams, potentially some manufacturers that may be interested in figuring out how to get contracts or subcontracts with funding that's coming through the DOD. So I'm going to kick it off talking about SBIRs, all the infrastructure setup needed to apply in the first place, thinking about what types of companies are a good fit for SBIRs, and walk through sort of the checklist of items that have to happen. I'll then kick it over to Olga, who will talk about sort of the other options for working with the DOD, talk a little bit more about the GSA, and then we'll get into the Q&A. So to get started, a quick background on myself and Olga. I've generally been working in startups and investment for about the past 9 years. I've been an early employee of a number of software and hardware startups. I spent about 2.5 years running the program at Outlook Gear, actually under AFworks. I recently joined Donnelly-Boland and Associates this year, January 2021, and I focus a lot with our high-tech startup companies, specifically a lot of the ones that have government contracts. So over my sort of career, I've submitted about $10 million worth of SBIRs or STTRs, either for companies I've been a part of or helping clients. I've actively managed about $4.5 million worth of grants and contracts between the Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, Department of Energy, and been a part of, like I said, a number of startups. Olga, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Sure. Hi, I'm Olga. I'm the co-founder of a small consulting firm based here in Pittsburgh called KRNLS. We work at the intersection of economic development and technology. We work with government organizations and developers to infuse tech and startups into rural areas. My background is working with small businesses and startups for the past 11 years. I've brought in over $10 million in DOD funding to various organizations, and I've managed about $2 million worth of grants and contracts through NASA and DARPA. And I also serve as an EIR at Carnegie Mellon, and that's it.
Awesome. So real question. You're early stage startup, you're thinking about SBIRs, you've heard the term mentioned, and you wonder, is this something that you should pursue? So, from a very high level, what is an SBIR? This is, small business innovation research grant or contract. Typically for the Department of Defense, it's usually a contract. And, essentially this is, every agency is required to put a certain amount of their budget towards SBIRs, right? And this is a way to sort of enable tech commercialization that the DOD or other organizations can benefit from, right? This is not, hey, the DOD is going to fund this R&D exclusively for the DOD. They're looking to take tech and spit it out into the commercial world, right? They want to basically help be the spark that can do that. It's really nice because it's non-dilutive. They're essentially your customer, your customer. Typically, SBIRs are split up into phase 1 and phase 2 contracts. Sometimes they have what's called an option period. And generally, the phase 1 contracts are roughly in the 150 to 240K range. This is kind of a moving target. It depends on the specific topic and solicitation. As of for 2022, they're upping the price of the of sort of the base periods across the board. AFworks, which is the Air Force's sort of like innovation arm, has a slightly different approach. They do a 3-month, $50,000 phase 1 that's focused pretty much exclusively on customer discovery and no real technical development. But typically you're looking at sort of like 6 months, 150K total to 12 months, 250K. And again, these numbers are sort of constantly changing. If you are, if you do your phase 1 well and you submit a final report, you can apply for a phase 2, which you're not necessarily guaranteed to get. But if you do, this is a longer, longer time frame and generally a little bit more, intensive. Sort of going from basic concept, validation in phase 1 to actually trying to get something into the field in a phase 2. And this is really nice because the Department of Defense is giving you money for your research and development, right? It's subsidizing your R&D and it's not taking any equity in your company, which is really nice for, a lot of startups who are looking to, raise money from VCs or angels. A lot of times they have, there's a data rights section, right? And essentially by giving you this funding, they are allowed to, basically use the things that you make, right? So if you have something that exists, the AFworks has a really good slide on this where I say like, okay, you've got this sort of whatever, you've got a widget, and then the data rights analogy is, okay, you get funding from them and you figure out a new way to like paint it. The DOD, can basically has access to use that paint because it was, made with their money. SBIRs go across, it's not just the DOD, it's the NSF, the NIH, a number of other organizations, but the biggest funders are the DOD and the NIH. And the DOD is a really good place to start. It's a very sort of straightforward, well, it's complex, but consistent process.
They have sometimes they'll have open calls and then sometimes they'll have specific project calls for specific types of research or technology they're looking for, correct?
Yeah, so a lot of times you'll have sort of topic solicitations. So 3 times a year, the DOD publishes, hey, here's all the topics that we want to make, we want people to submit things for, like, we're looking for this specific piece of technology to do this thing. And you can submit to that and say like, hey, I built a thing that's like that. Or, hey, I built something that's completely different from the thing you asked for, but I think solves the same problem. You'll submit to it. Or generally they'll have like an open topics of like, hey, do we not list something? Toss something in there. So those, that's sort of a pro and a con. If you do an open topic, it has to be sort of really good and you have to do a lot of work to convince them that it's, worth their time. But on the other hand, you're also not competing against, hundreds of other organizations who are pitching the same thing. So SBIRs for startups, I think a lot of times people start and stop because it's a little bit of an overwhelming process and they're not really sure if it's a good fit, right? The pros to doing SBIRs as an early stage company are pretty big ones, right? You're getting meaningful money, right? You're getting, tens of thousands of dollars to upwards of millions of dollars that is non-dilutive, right? You're not giving away any part of your company for that. It is a good way to catalyze additional investment. It's a good brand stamp for your company to say like, hey, these guys don't think I'm crazy. They're giving me money to develop this. I think there's a need here. And, that can be really, really helpful, right? Because again, as an investor, if I'm looking at somebody and saying like, all right, they probably need $500,000 to like get to their next sort of, technical milestone. I'm not really sure here, but if you're putting money in and that money is getting, matched or exceeded by government funds, that company has a lot higher chance of success and you're not going to be diluted by those funds. So it can be a good opportunity if you do get an award to say, hey, we just got, $250K, we want to, raise additional funds to sort of, get this thing off the ground. Cons of going down the SBIR pathway, this is a very time intensive process, right? The application, especially if you're setting up the infrastructure to apply in the first time, there's a big, barrier to entry, especially for a lot of startups who are very like, all right, get things done last minute, put in a whole bunch of work. This is something that like, you can't just jam through at the last minute. You have to sort of plan out the process and make sure you check all the boxes. Once you actually get the award, it requires a lot of disciplined project management. You have to do timesheets, right? You have to make sure that your accounting infrastructure is set up appropriately to do all the reporting, right? You really need to make sure that if you bid on it and you get it, you can do the thing that you said you're going to do without completely running out of money, right? Which sometimes is a little bit hard if you're changing your technology or shifting your market every few months, right? That can be hard for a startup. One thing that took me a long time to learn, right? These are not necessarily grants and contracts that are really going to accelerate the growth of your company, right? These are meant to basically focus very specifically on funding that, and subsidizing that research and development. So, you get your sort of, there's a couple different types of contract types. There's firm fixed price and there's cost plus. There's time and materials. Most phase ones are firm fixed price. It's just a flat fee. You have to put a budget, they agree on it, and then it's up to you. If you run it really well, you can make a profit on it. If you, can't do what you say you can do with the budget that you have, you might run a loss. Once you get to a phase two, that's, a little bit more of a, it gets even more, important to make sure you budget it right. And so, I think a lot of folks are like, oh, I got like $1.5 million. This is great. And it's like, well, there's a lot of restrictions in how you can use that. And so you need to make sure you do it right. Really, when thinking about whether this is something you want to pursue, I think there's three big questions you need to ask yourself. Does the DOD need it enough that they've written a topic on it, right? In this sort of like, tri-annual batch of solicitations, did they write something that was very, very close to the solution that you have, right? Is there a strong need for it? If it's kind of tangential, right? Like there's probably lots of things that you could apply to early on. Like, oh, I could do that. Yeah, my technology is close to that. This may be a good solution, right? The question that you need to think about, as a founder or a leader in your organization is, if we spend our time on this, is this going to push our technology and our commercialization in the right direction? Because it's very easy to get caught in the trap of like, okay, we could like apply to a bunch of these different things. And, if you're trying to move forward here in sort of your commercial business development and technical development, and the DOD is going to give you some money, but you're going to go this way, you have to make the call whether that's actually worth your resources. Because if it goes this way, you don't see a strong long-term path there, then it may not be worth diverting your resources for that, even if it gets cash in the door. And then really most importantly, does somebody outside the DOD need this commercially, right? The DOD is not interested in, funding sort of R&D that just then sits on the shelf and they don't like see it anymore, right? They want to catalyze this technology to help you grow your business so that if they ever need that technology, it's available and they can purchase it from you, but you're a sustainable business yourself without solely relying on DOD funds. And that's where a lot of people get caught too, right? You sort of start this pathway, you get good at doing these SBIRs, and you can get stuck in sort of just focusing on, they call them, sometimes people are like, oh, that's an SBIR farm, right? Or that's a SBIR farm. And it's just like, okay, they're just constantly pumping out new technology, but just sort of doing that R&D and then not really taking it to the next level commercially. So the win-win-win scenario is, I have this technology, the DOD needs it, they funded the development of it, and then I've been able to take that, which they've funded, over to the commercial sector and say, hey, big corporate, or even more, maybe in B2C, like, look at this thing I've developed, and you grow your business off of that. And then if you get really good, you can ping pong it back to, the DOD later for actual procurement level contracts and say like, okay, like, we've built up our infrastructure, we have manufacturing now, we're all set to do this. Yeah, you can actually, we'll sell it to you like you're a commercial customer. So, okay, how do you decide whether this is worth your time, right? Here are some very broad brush stroke assumptions that are completely anecdotal from my experience. So, talk to a bunch of other people, see what other people say. In general, when you're doing this for the first time by yourself with no help, it's probably about 50 hours of company like infrastructure registration setup just to be able to apply for an SBIR in the first place, right? There's a checklist of items that I'm going to go through later of sort of what you need to do, but they can be very confusing. They can be very overwhelming. Oftentimes you're logging into one system to get a password to go into another system, which lets you into the third system where you can actually submit, right? And a lot of times, you're trying to figure out, okay, what does this mean? And the documentation on it is, can be iffy, and they're changing every year to 2 years. So sometimes, processes, even some of the stuff that we're talking about right now is in flux. In general, when you sort of get good at it, I think a good ballpark estimate, it's about 80 man hours to get a proposal from start to finish, between looking at all of the, topics, narrowing it down to the 1 or 2 that you may want to apply to in a cycle, doing the sort of, technical prep, project prep, budgeting, writing the commercialization section, going and getting letters of support from other, commercial companies to say, oh yeah, by the way, if you can actually build this, I totally want to buy it, or I'll work with you for manufacturing if you get a phase 2 or whatever. Like, that's something that takes a lot of time to do. And it's one of the most important things that's going to determine, whether you get something or not. Generally you've got about a 2-month window from when these sort of solicitations come out to when they're due. I think a good sort of ballpark metric for success is about a 20% chance of getting awarded, right? That can obviously go up as you get more experience at this. This can obviously go up if your technology is freaking amazing and nobody's, there's a huge business opportunity and you're making magic dust. But think about the things that you can sort of do to do your own back of the napkin math and say, okay, well, how much is this award, or like number of awards that we're applying? What's our percentage win? What's the sort of weighted value of that money? And then how many hours is it going to take for us to do that? Doing this as a 1 or 2 person team versus like a 5 or 10 person team is often a different story, right? Like, you can probably devote some folks' time when you get a little bit larger to make sure this happens. If you're taking up, a good chunk, of time from the executive team to make this happen early on, like, sometimes it may not be a good fit at this time, right? I have known a lot of people that have been very successful, building their companies and their technology off of DOD or NIH grants and contracts. And, some of them have gone public, right? And so it can be a very good strategy, but you have to, really decide, especially early on, especially when you're first thinking about it. Okay, is the time that I'm going to spend on this worth, that setup, or should I take that time and try and raise money or try and get, commercial deals closed where I'm going to be able to use that money however I want, and it's going to be sort of more useful for the stage that you're at right now. Okay, getting to the actual nuts and bolts of submission, right? There's a lot of different guides across the board, but this is, I think, sort of the biggest high level thing that I could come up with. So the first thing you need to do until April 4th of 2022 is to get a DUNS number, Dun & Bradstreet. So as of April 4th, 2022, this is going to be replaced with a, what is it called, Olga? A UEI, Unique Employment Identifier.
Identification number.
Yeah.
Which will be
Through SAM.
Through SAM, which Chris will.
Yeah. Yeah. So once you get your DUNS, if you're applying right now, once you get through your DUNS, then you're going to need to make a login.gov account. That login.gov account is used across a number of different platforms and agencies. So once you create that login.gov account, you will use your login.gov account to register for SAM. You will also use it to register for DSIP, which is the Defense SBIR/STTR innovation portal. It used to be a whole bunch of different agency microsites. They migrated, they're doing a pretty good job of migrating to all onto this portal. The registration for SAM is very intense. It's a very scary form with a million different pages on it, asking a bunch of questions that, I mean, the first time I looked at it, I was like, I don't even know what you're asking, let alone how I'd find the answer to it. So that's something where there are a lot of companies that will offer to do your SAM registration for you. A lot of them are pretty scammy. A lot of times they sort of make it, they pretend like there's some official government thing and you have to pay them a fee. It's free to register in SAM. You may want to hire a consultant or somebody who's done it before to help you because they'll be able to do it fast, make sure it gets done right. But be wary of the one-off internet services that are going to do the registration for you. When you register in SAM, you will get a cage code. Your DUNS number and your cage code are two very key pieces of information that you're going to need to apply to anything. So pretty much, oftentimes this is the first advice, even if you're not really sure whether you're going to do SBIRs like now or in the near future, it's probably a good idea just to get these set up so that you're not like, oh, okay, we decided we're going to do this, but now I have to wait and figure out this all out. SAM used to require a notarized letter. It sounds like we don't have to do that anymore. Is that correct, Olga? Yeah. So once you get through SAM, then you can register on DSIP. And this is where you will actually submit your DOD SBIR application. Once you have that registered, there's a lot of, you have to sort of set different permissions for different people in the company who can sign off and submit things. Once you have all of that done, take a moment to breathe and celebrate, because that's like half to 3/4 of the battle right there. And that's where a lot of that sort of 50 hours that I was talking about previously, a lot of it gets caught up in there. So after you're in, yeah, question?
One thing that I feel like people have a lot of trouble with when they're just getting started is the alphabet soup of all of the acronyms that go into this whole process. What does a cage code stand for, and what is DSIP? So
DSIP is the Defense SBIR STTR innovation portal. So that's where you're actually submitting things. I honestly don't know what a cage code stands for, but it is a number that is a unique identifier to your company. So both the DUNS and your cage are how you're going to register for a number of different platforms. When you get an award and have to invoice through wide area workflow or IRAP or whatever it's called now, that's what you're basically going to be using. So like, okay, here's my cage code. They look you up. They say, oh, you've had this award. Okay, this all matches. Here you go. Here's your stuff, right?
Gotcha. SAM.gov is a separate registry that goes sort of across all governmental organizations. And
correct. Login.gov and SAM.gov are very general across everything. DSIP is specifically for DOD SBIRs.
I also want to mention that without a cage code, you cannot get paid. That is how they identify your company in terms of payment. So if you do not get approved on SAM, which will automatically generate a cage code for you, if you do not receive that, it's very important that you do, because otherwise you will not get paid.
Yep.
Don't lose that code.
Yeah.
And that's something we'll be talking about a little bit more in your portion, Olga, correct? Because that also that applies to contracting or subcontracting with the Department of Defense outside of just an SBIR in particular.
Absolutely, yeah.
Correct. So once you're into the system, this is where, and I don't think you necessarily actually need to register in DSIP to be able to view solicitation topics. You'll see this sort of in the general thing, they'll say topic info, and these little things here, you'll see DOD SBIR 22.1 is currently open. You've got 63 days to, get those applications in. So if you want to apply to that, get started now. And so this is where you can view all those topics. You can read through and say, okay, what are these, what are the challenges that folks are having at the DoD? Where are they requesting sort of technological solutions for? And you see if yours a fit. And there's a lot of them each cycle. The Navy, I think, usually has a good chunk. I don't know if it's the majority, but I see there's the most coming through our client base. And once you find a topic that you think would be applicable, it's very important to attend the webinars that they have set up through this DSIP portal. It used to be that you would have a topic and there'd be a TPOC, technical point of contact, assigned to that solicitation. And then you would try and set up a time to call that TPOC, try and get them, at least an email exchange back and forth to ask them questions about the solicitation. That is no more because it was very inefficient. And so what they do is they schedule webinars, and the TPOC will attend that, and they'll basically say, hey, here's what we're looking for. Here's the question. If everybody has any questions, shoot them out right now in a group session and go back and forth. So it's important to attend those webinars, not only to get your questions answered, but also to scope out the competition, see what everybody else is asking, see what their angles are, and what you may be proposing against. There are a number of templates on DSIP. There's one for the technical volume template is the one that's, sort of matters the most in terms of formatting. That's your sort of, actual like, hey, here's what we're going to propose. There is also a link to a Navy microsite that has a number of different templates from proposing all the way to, okay, you've been awarded, now here's how you do your reporting. So if you're looking for templates, I highly recommend going through the actual DoD websites. There's lots of templates that lots of people have made all across the board, but it's really important to sort of check whatever. Not much has changed. It's Times New Roman. It's, your 1-inch margins. They want the sections to be in this has pretty much been the same for, the past 5 years, but always check and always make sure you're going through that specific website to get that. Budgeting is really, really important. Most people who are doing this for the first time, they haven't really heard about, or maybe sort of unfamiliar about the real distinction between direct or indirect costs. They may be, sort of confused on how they should really put together a budget. And, you need to be important about sort of what you promise and the funds you're requesting for it, because you really want to make sure that you can actually deliver what you say you're going to deliver. Because, doing well on your phase 1 impacts your ability to get your phase 2. It also impacts your other sort of, proposals down the line. You want to make sure that, you're not sort of failing to meet deliverables, because that doesn't look good the next time that you try and propose for something. If you're into some very exciting reading, I recommend, I made a post on Medium about understanding indirect rates, how they're calculated, what they mean. It's very dry, but hopefully it will be helpful if you guys are digging in. I highly, highly, highly recommend that you submit your proposal 48 hours before the deadline, because every single person submits their proposal in the last 24 hours and the system can barely handle it. They don't have enough space on AWS, or it doesn't go quickly enough, because it will get so laggy. It's almost impossible to, upload files and save things because it gets so laggy. So make sure that if you say okay, we got 63 days, you're submitting on day 61, because it is really, really tough to submit that. If you do get awarded an SBIR, I highly, highly recommend, and I obviously have a very biased opinion here, immediately hire an accountant who has worked with the DOD or the DCAA, Defense Contract Audit Association, maybe not association, before you start, because most of your sort of mom and pop accountants don't really know how things need to be structured to segregate costs appropriately and make reporting easy. At my previous organization, we did not know how to do that, and we hired Donnelly-Boland to do it for us, and it was one of the best decisions we ever made. The way that you set up your accounting infrastructure in QuickBooks or whatever system you have is really important, because the way you set up your chart of accounts and sort of deal with classes or customers can make reporting super, super easy, a breeze, 3 clicks and done, or it can make it a total pain in the butt to try and pull everything together for, budgets. And if you're ever negotiating rates and you have to fill out an ICE form, it's a pain. So the other thing that you need to do as soon as you get a phase 1 is get timesheets. And I know startups hate timesheets, but QuickBooks Time or Clockify, or QuickBooks Time used to be called T-Sheets, are 2 very user-friendly, very easy to use apps that integrate with most payroll systems that will allow you to segregate your time appropriately and abide by all the controls and FAR regulations that you need to have. If at any point during the thinking about submitting to we're trying to submit to we got awarded now, what do I do process, if you have any questions at any point, feel free to shoot me an email. I'm happy to just sort of give, sort of quick back and forth. And, if you want Donnelly-Boland to take a look at any part of this, we do this all the time for a whole suite of people, suite of companies of, 1 to 100 plus. So yeah, with that, I'm going to kick it over to Olga to talk about some of the more general contracts.
Chris, there's actually a question.
Oh yeah.
Have you ever used harvest time tracking? Is there any reason not to use that instead of QuickBooks?
I have not. I know that both Clockify and QuickBooks are DCAA approved, and those are the folks that are basically have all the requirements for what your timekeeping policies need to be. So I would just Google harvest time and see if they, it's some pretty basic stuff. As long as you are able to put your time into the appropriate codes and that gets into your, payroll system somehow, you're probably fine. But I don't have specific experience with that tool.
Okay.
Good eye, Olga.
So there are also other ways of working with the Department of Defense. Specifically, if there's not, a specific call out and you have a potential solution that you'd like to pursue, there are other ways you can do that. You don't have to wait for an SBIR to be available. What that means is that you're working with a very, very specific department within the DOD. And so, we have our branches. I didn't even list all of them, but, for example, if you wanted to work, actually, I'm sorry, I should not have listed the Marines and the Navy separately. They're actually under one umbrella. But if you, let's say, wanted to work with them, you would actually be working with like a very specific department within the Navy. And the problem with doing all of that is, I think this lends, this works better if you're just like a little bit more established, because you really need to know people. Because what happens, the way their purchasing system works is so wild. They have, they can't just make credit card purchases. They can't, just say like, hey, you're good. Let's work together. And even within a small department, depending on what you're producing and what your project is, what your idea is, the way they purchase and the way they use it sometimes even varies, like from base to base or from state to state. So you just have to be, very aware and very careful. So my suggestion is that if this is your first time working with the Department of Defense, one of the best ways to do that is to subcontract first. So you would find someone that already has a direct contract within the Department of Defense. They've already gone through this, and you would just act as a subcontractor to them, providing whatever service or idea that you have. This would kind of allow you to see what is actually happening and how intense it is, and then evaluate if this is something that you want to do or not. Similar to what Chris described earlier, there's so much reporting and there's so much documentation. You have to provide literal receipts for every single dollar that you spend. It is, I think, very important that you know that you can handle that before you step into being a prime contractor or even applying for an SBIR or an STTR. Next slide. So let's start off with talking about being a subcontractor. So when you are a subcontractor to a prime, you are not allowed to have any direct contact with the customer, whoever it is within the Department of Defense, without the presence of the prime. It is like highly, highly frowned upon. There are some exceptions, but like typically really frowned upon. So that means that when you have to make one small change, you have to go up this chain of, it's just, it's a bottleneck. So be prepared for that. All terms are ironclad, cannot be changed. All of your, all terms are fixed. So you can't say, well, we actually ended up spending $2,000 more on this, so can we be reimbursed for that? You cannot do that. So your contract and your terms are non-negotiable. You do all of that before you sign the contract. And the other thing that you should be aware of, it's very likely that you will not receive payment until the completion of the work, meaning that your project is like fully complete. You've provided whatever it is you promised to provide, and then you get a check for it. I have seen it done at my previous job where you get, percentage up front, but it is, you have to negotiate so hard. And this is when, hiring someone that has done this before comes in, you have to kind of know when you can ask, when you should ask, and how much you should ask for. So a lot of times what you can ask for is for all of your hard costs to be covered up front, and then your labor costs to be covered on the back. But again, depending on who you're working with, they have very strict policies about that. Next slide. So then if you have gone through this process, or you're saying, you know what, being a subcontractor sucks, I still want to, pursue becoming a prime contractor. The way to do that is if you have a specific thing, and, I just threw this picture up of like a milled item. So let's say, for example, you're producing something very specific, and you want to sell this to the Department of Defense. And this can go on like every ship or every helicopter or whatever. You're going to find the representative, so someone with purchasing power in the specific branch that you want to work in. And then they will direct you to like the sub purchaser that can make that decision. You're going to present your solution, you're going to receive feedback. And then there's like a qualification process that you have to go through. And this process takes about a year. It is an online portal that you have to go through, but you can't do any of that before you have completed all the steps that Chris listed earlier in the webinar. So until you've registered for all of these things, and you've got all of your logins and your cage code, you cannot even approach this. So make sure that all of your ducks are in a row there before you start this application process, because it's literally the first thing they ask you for. And then when you become a prime, then you can hire subcontractors. And that could be a really nice infusion of funding. Typically, a prime can keep up to 7% of the contract, just as a, like a management fee, and then, have someone else do the work for you. Next slide.
Is there any specific designation that separates a prime from a subcontractor, like a, like a diploma or
Their
something?
names on the contract.
Yeah, there's the entire Department of Defense has a list of contractors that they're allowed to work with, and those are all prime contractors.
Okay.
They're not allowed to pay anybody who is a subcontractor directly.
Gotcha. And so where is that list housed? Is that part of the?
I don't know that you can get your hands on it.
In the DOD.
Yeah, but there are ways that you can, on SAM, you can actually see what projects are available and what people like have worked on it. So you can reach out to companies and say, would you like to work together? I know the company that I've worked with previously, they're called like Bennett Aerospace, and they were just like a prime contractor out of North Carolina. And yeah.
Gotcha.
The other thing, there are often contract requirements for the larger prime contractors that a certain portion of their funds need to be given to small businesses. And I think increasingly women and minority-owned businesses. So if you fit any of those buckets, and like small business, technical definition of small business concern for the DOD is like under 500 people. So, I think that there's a lot of opportunity in a number of areas that have sort of like centralized DOD work to approach those prime contractors, say, hey, I can do this, and I can help you hit your requirements for that.
Thanks, guys. Those are great tips.
Okay, so another way you can work with the Department of Defense, and it's really my favorite way, is the GSA, the General Service Administration. And what it really is, it's a purchasing platform for any federal organizations. So once you're on there, you can literally sell to like a public school. You can sell to NASA. You can sell to like any VA hospital, depending on what your technology is. It's any federally owned or federally funded organization. So it just, increases your client scope, greatly. Next slide. So the GSA is huge. It's split up into smaller departments. So for example, if you have, they have an entire additive manufacturing department. They have an entire subtractive manufacturing department. So whatever you're thinking about, they have like a specific narrow department that can help you. Their jobs are to help you get onto the GSA schedule. And speaking of alphabet soup, Chris, one thing we forgot to mention is a NAICS code. Everyone needs to get to understand what their NAICS code is. And the GSA is you have to have a NAICS code to be able to receive a contract. NAICS code kind of identifies what general area of service provider you are in. So there's like a NAICS code for additive manufacturing, and a NAICS code for economic development, and whatever you can think of, there's a NAICS code for it. And so you will have to find that you can look it up and just adopt it. So when you are like looking at these smaller departments, it will actually say, servicing NAICS codes numbers XYZ. So remember, that is important. This is also an online application similar to SBIRs and STTRs. So you're going to get, there's a lot of documents that you have to put together, especially accounting documents about your own company that you have to upload into their platform. It does take about 8 months, and I would highly recommend speaking with a representative there and potentially even hiring a consultant to help you get through this process, because it is absolutely a bear. There is one part of it, and I kid you not, you have to watch videos for 20 hours. 20 hours of video, and you cannot move on until you can't skip it. It literally has to play, and you have to watch it because it gives you so much information about filling out the actual forms and how to do it. So the time commitment is pretty huge. The other thing that you need to be aware of, and they call it making the government your favorite customer, which means that you will not give a discount to any other client that will beat the discount that you're giving to the Department of Defense. So the discount can be like, we'll give you 10% off, or we'll give you free shipping, or whatever, makes sense for your budget. But when looking at your numbers, and again, you do have to report every quarter, so you have to report if you've ever beaten that discount, and if so, then you have to refund the Department of Defense. Again, consider hiring a consultant for the application process. It is a nightmare. Next slide. Questions?
All right, thank you both. That was super informative. And we don't have any questions in the chat currently, but we do have some questions that were submitted ahead of time, as well as some questions that I have. So working backwards to the most recent slide, being listed on the GSA does not necessarily mean that you are a prime contractor, because you could be selling to school systems or other various government departments. The prime designation is explicitly for DOD contracts. Is that correct?
Yes and no. So becoming a prime contractor to the Department of Defense literally just means that you have a direct contract with them. So if you receive a contract through the GSA, you are a prime contractor. But I think the biggest difference is there are many companies that I've worked with where their solutions are very specific. So they make a drain plug for showers on boats. So they're never going to work, with the Air Force. So they never need to be on the GSA schedule. They need to have a prime contract directly with the Navy, and that's it. So they don't need to go through this other process. So they just need to become a prime. But if you are we make this super awesome special coating or plastic, and this could be applied in 8 different ways, then yeah, the GSA is probably a better place for you, because you can have a number of customers. Yeah. The problem with the GSA though is that there's thousands of people that are selling their services, so it's very easy to get buried in this sea. So when Chris was saying, that you should go to the webinars and it's a way to size up your competition and things like that, there are webinars that the DOD puts on all the time. It's a really great way to network and to get to know not just your potential customer, but other people you could partner with. I think, the DOD is fairly incestuous in terms of the way they give out contracts. So if you know someone and you're recommended by someone, you're very likely to get rehired. So if GSA is the way you want to go, make sure that that's something that you either have a customer in mind, someone, or your representative knows of a project that's starting, as opposed to when you're pursuing a prime contract, meaning that you already have your target customer, they already said yes, like they want to do this.
Mhm.
If that makes sense.
We got a question from Andy, which was, does the GSA have solicitations on it, or is it just a sort of open advertisement that you can provide
It is
these
just
services?
Mhm.
Gotcha. So that's what you mean by it getting buried. Another question related to the GSA is there a minimum threshold for GSA purchases? For example, if a DOD facility needs a specific light bulb that costs $40, can they buy it on Amazon, or does a GSA need a stock number and purchase request through the hierarchy?
So this is a really, really good question. There is no minimum purchase or number or item or anything like that. But the GSA also, or people from the DOD can't they can't just buy stuff from
You have to be an approved vendor, right?
Yeah.
Like, oftentimes, and again, I'm speaking a little bit out of my depth here, so feel free if I say something that is completely wrong. But I think an example that somebody at the Coast Guard gave me once was like, yeah, like I would be like, okay, we're out of like printer paper. I need like printer paper for this thing. And rather than just being able to like, yeah, bam, like bring it in or whatever, it's like, I have to put in a request that goes to a specific thing, that goes to the one person who like the DOD has made a contract for to supply, or like that branch or area is made to supply printer paper to their specific location. They have to order it from them because like, again, all this stuff's been like negotiated beforehand. I don't know if that's necessarily specifically tied into the GSA, but that's oftentimes how purchasing works, is my understanding.
And this is why the GSA exists, is so that when you need a light bulb, you can just go on the GSA and say, hey, who's providing light bulbs? But the problem is that there's not enough like variety of vendors. So a really good example that I saw is when I was out in 29 Palms, which is a Marine base in California. They had, this giant router that had broken down, and they spent about, the thing cost like 45 grand. And it was essentially used as a coat rack because there was one tiny part that was broken, but they couldn't replace it because there was no way for them to buy that part. Like literally there's no pathway for them to buy that part. So they ended up buying a whole other new router and spent another $45,000, which, just like it made my head explode. But that is their reality of their situation. So no, they can't just like go on Amazon and just buy whatever they want.
That is fascinating and mind-boggling. A question that I had was, is there, like Chris was talking about with the DSIP, is there a portal for RFPs that go out for general contracts that each branch is looking for? Does each branch have their own sort of portal where they put open solicitations or project calls, or is there a centralized one? Like, does sam.gov put out all?
Yes.
Or most?
Like 99% of the stuff you can find on sam.gov, and you can actually look at historical SBIRs and grants and all different, anything that they put out, you can find on GSA, or I'm sorry, on SAM, and you can look literally like 20 years back.
Nice.
Another thing, there's the broad agency announcements. That's sort of the general thing. The other innovation focused funnel that we didn't really talk today is a Rapid Innovation Fund, a RIF. And that's sort of along with SBIRs and STTRs, another sort of program designed to quickly engage and and get technology into the hands of the DOD. And again, that's a little bit, I think it's a little bit broader in sort of how different agencies use it, but that application process is, can be easier. It can be harder. But oftentimes, I've seen ones that are like, hey, give me a quad chart, which is basically one PowerPoint slide that says, there's like 4 sections to it and a 5-page white paper, and tell me when I should buy your thing, right? And so that can be another way to sort of get involved. And so, putting a sort of, alert out for those is a good methodology as well.
I've heard of those types of innovation funds. Like I believe that's how AI2C is funded here in Pittsburgh, the Army, or the Artificial Intelligence Integration Center. And they have a pathway to get you funds that ultimately is DOD funding, which can come in the form of a 1-page white paper to submit to it, but I don't believe that is thus listed on like sam.gov. So you'd have to be aware of where your specific innovation lies and what sub department is looking for those innovations. Andy asked, Chris, can you elaborate on customer discovery for SBIRs and STTRs? Is AFworks the only way to discuss needs with the government to try and develop a solution before the official solicitation goes out?
I'll speak to what I think the question is, and then tell me if I get it wrong. So what the Air Force did in like 2017 or 2018 is they developed this program called AFworks. And really what that was designed to do is to take the current SBIR solicitation infrastructure and make it a lot more startup friendly and kind of mimic, the VC funding landscape. So rather than saying, hey, put in this 20-page SBIR and do this and this and this and this, and it's going to be, $200,000 to say, we're going to make a whole bunch of really small bets without any sort of real technical development. And we're going to give you $50K, and you're going to go out and find a purchaser within the Air Force. So you're going to go out and you're going to go talk to a bunch of people at Air Force bases, find the department, like we'll pay you to spend the time to take your solution. And again, they have some topic areas as well, right? But like take the time to like go find the person that says, yes, if you have this, like I have budget and I will pay for it, right? And so it's kind of, it was a little bit of flipping the SBIR program on their head and just trying to make it more efficient. Where it's like, okay, we're going to cast a broader net. We're going to get more folks in. And if in 3 months and $50,000, they can find somebody who's like, yeah, I need this, it's a better methodology. There's usually customer discovery that is involved when doing a phase 1 SBIR, right? You've got what they talk a lot about TRLs, technology readiness levels, right? And it goes from 1 to 9, and 9 is like you're out in the world and great, and 1 is you basically got a concept. So a lot of SBIRs are designed, sort of take it. Okay, we generally take things that are like TRL 3 or 4, and by the end we're trying to get it to 5 or 6, right? And part of that is doing actual customer discovery and making sure you're making something that somebody will pay money for, right? But it's sort of that you're doing both your technical development and your customer development at the same time. There are generally, as far as I understand it at this point, no real technical deliverable requirements for those phase 1 AFworks. And that's why they're shorter, and that's why they're only $50,000.
Let me see if I can allow Andy to speak here to see if that answers his question.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yep.
Cool. Yeah, that kind of answered it. It seems like the Air Force, they weren't really doing that because like really the hardest part is it seems like by the time the solicitations go out, if you weren't already doing that kind of research, you don't really have a chance at figuring that stuff out ahead of time. So I guess I'm really trying to understand, like, how do you even become an SBIR, STTR farm, like you mentioned? Like clearly those people are figuring out a way to predict what's coming out, so they have solutions ready to go. I feel like there's no way that in a couple months they just came up with a solution out of the blue.
Yes, that's a very perceptive read on the situation. Most of the people who have been doing this for like 10 or 20 years are, friends and have networked with all of the people who are pushing out the topic areas. And so they have a sense of like, hey, here's what's coming down the pipeline. That being said, a lot of it is just matching your capabilities to topics that are a good fit, right? So usually it's like, okay, you know, the idea is you have a topic out there, somebody has sort of done some pre-work and said, okay, there's a need within the DOD for a technological solution that can solve this problem. Sometimes they scope out what they think that technical solution should be. You know, like, okay, we want something to make this jet engine cooler because it's overheating, and therefore we want something that's going to do all these things. And maybe you're, you know, an aerospace company that has a solution to that. Maybe you're not an aerospace company, but you have something that, you know, you think you can work in there. And it's really just finding, you know, being able to search the keywords and those topic proposals that come out that match with what your company does. And then the trickiest part is getting from that sort of phase 1, phase 2 sort of benchtop validation to actual procurement within the DOD to be like, okay, these people have this problem and budget and can, you know, it's kind of like Olga was talking before, can sign the check to say, yeah, I want to do a contract, right? And so oftentimes it's easier to sort of do that ping pong where you say, okay, I think there's a lot of people commercially who need this, but the DOD can fund it under this topic. I'm going to take this from an early prototype to something that's like functional in the field, go get a commercial customer or multiple commercial customers, like build my company. And once I'm at a higher, like, you know, TRL, right? And you're like, hey, look, it's been working in all these different companies across all these different industries. Now, do you want to buy it? Sort of ping pong to the DOD.
No, thank you. It's a very good answer. You or Olga might be able to answer the follow-up, which I think any startup here would really be wondering is like they're trying to figure out how do we focus our research on stuff that we know would be useful, right? So well, you said people are doing that kind of networking. Are there particular like trade shows or like government trade shows where they're doing that kind of thing? Or like how are they even doing that unless they're just like in the military already? It's like the only other thing I can think of.
There is a conference for sure that in DC or Baltimore, I forget, almost every year. And it's like a showcase of all the current SBIRs and STTRs. And that is one where you have some people who are topic, you know, they're within the DOD. You have a lot of a lot of companies that have been awarded SBIRs. And then you have also a bunch of larger government contractors, the Raytheons, the Lockheed Martins, whatever, that are going and looking for technology that they can put into their larger stuff. So I'd say that like out of any ones that I've heard of, and I am totally blanking on the name, but if you shoot me an email after this, I can follow up and give it to you. That is the one that I don't think it's ridiculously expensive. And I think it's probably the highest concentration of folks across all years.
Is it literally just called the SBIR STTR Innovation Conference?
Potentially. I don't want to confirm that, but I'll
fair enough. I'll send you an email.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any conferences, but also if you look at like the military websites, they actually blog a lot about what they're looking for. One place that I always like to look at is the DAU. It's the Defense Acquisition University, and you can literally you can take classes there. It's all about like how the military purchases stuff. But one thing they blog about is tips and tricks and how to get contracts within the Department of Defense, and what are they looking for, and what stage of things are they looking for. So that might give you at least a good preview and a nod towards what you should be researching.
Last thing that I just thought of that comment sparked, Olga. A lot of times from the top level, the agencies are going to set their 5-year mission values, right? So hey, we're working on getting energy consumption in rough areas down by 50%, and we're care about mission readiness in this sector, and we're going to do this. And those high level things are not very actionable, but it gives you a sense of the types of things that they're focusing on, and you can see these guys have these 2 mission things that are kind of in a space that we play in. Maybe I should peek around to the types of things coming out of there.
I do agree with that, and it really seems really cyclical. Every couple of years they kind of pour a ton of money into like whatever is like the hottest new thing is. You know, I remember like a number of years ago was like anything additive manufacturing, like doesn't matter, we'll buy it, you know. And then it was like artificial intelligence, and it was like, great, we'll buy anything that like at all says AI on it. And then it was like drones, and now it's everything. Like now I feel everything that we're looking, you know, is like anything GPS denied, they're like, yes, we need that. So I think you can watch these cycles if you're looking at these missions and visions like Chris described.
In the interest of time, I'm going to throw you back on mute, Andy, but you can definitely follow up with Olga and Chris after we end up sharing the slides. There was one more question from Scott. He dropped it in the chat, which was, how do you find the GSA entity responsible for purchasing a specific item? And I'll unmute Scott here so that he can also sort of elaborate on his question.
Sure. So through the GSA, as I said previously, you have to have a NAICS code. So when you are applying, so you go to like gsa.gov, you start your application, you will be assigned a person, like an actual human being that is their job to help you get onto the GSA schedule. But until you like put in what your NAICS code is, that's how it sorts you into like the general smaller department that you're in. And then you would just talk to the person, they would help you through your, you know, application and things like that. So you wouldn't find them preemptively. I mean, maybe you could on like LinkedIn or something like that, but typically the process is you start your application once you have all of your documents, right, that Chris described, plus NAICS code.
NAICS.
I'm gonna type it in so that everyone has it. It's everyone needs a NAICS code. Once you have that, then you'll get sorted and you will get a human that will help you.
Okay, so when I find a human being, I think what I've been doing is going about it the wrong way. What I'm trying to do, so the product is a lens for an airfield ground light for all DOD airfields, regardless Navy, Air Force, Army. The way that I've been doing it is going to the airfields and trying to work my way up. And it sounds like the way to do it is to go through the process, GSA, get a representative and go down instead of up.
Absolutely, because again, this is a product that could be used literally on any base. And, you know, there are other airports, not just, or they're like landing strips that are not, you know, DOD owned or managed. So that could be a good way to, you know, be able to work with those clients as well.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Well, in the interest of time, since we're already over time, I'm okay with ending it if you guys are okay with sticking around. There was a few other questions that people had asked or submitted ahead of time. What do you think, Olga, Chris?
I've got T-minus 7 minutes, so
Let's do it.
pretty good. Let's go.
Okay, so let's see here. What else we got? Something specific. Do you guys know anything about any certifications or requirements by the DOD for companies to become contractors, in particular ITAR or IT cybersecurity stuff, like I think CMMC.
CMMC, yeah. So we'll start with cyber. So very, very high level, FAR, Federal Acquisition requirements is basically a giant list of everything that you have to do right when you're contracting with the government. When you get a contract for the government, they're going to have 2 pages of listing of numbers of all the things that you have to abide by in your contract. And so it's a pretty good idea to have a legal team that has some experience with those, to just be like, hey, yes, we can do this. No, we can do that. For cybersecurity, in 2017, they implemented something called NIST 800-171, which was a list of 110, 120 some odd cybersecurity controls that you had to be, you basically had to implement. They said, okay, starting this date, every single person has to do all of these things. And it was best practice, but pretty good, heavy lift for a lot of folks. And they said, well, you have to do that. And if you aren't doing it right now, you have to put together all this documentation that shows when you're going to do all these things and how you're going to do that. And so they kind of started that, and they went out and they did a bunch of like they basically went out and tried to help people do it. And they took a bunch of surveys and got a bunch of feedback, and they realized absolutely nobody was doing any of it. And so they basically took that and rolled that into the CMMC, Cyber Security Maturity Model something. I'm dying on my alphabet soup right now. But basically the same stuff plus a little bit more, and you're going to have a third party who is certified, to do this, come on site and not come on site, but verify they're actually doing all of those things. And that's going to be levels 1 through 5. And most contracts are like, you basically have to be at a level 3 to be able to get anything. And then 4 and 5 would be like the super secure ones. ITAR is basically, don't even know what the acronym stands for. Weapon systems, right? Things that are, really dangerous. So yes, when you get to contracts that have actual ITAR requirements, it's very intense. There's a lot. Talk to somebody who knows what they're doing.
So in short, there is a general, very large and extensive list of the FAR of all of the potential requirements, but then your specific contract will call out and expect that you have them already in place whenever you go to essentially negotiate.
Yeah, and the CMMC is not technically in place yet. It's coming. I mean, NIST 800-171 was supposed to be coming it took them 10 years to implement it, right? CMMC, they keep saying, I think they're like, okay, we're going to start adding it to contracts as like a soft requirement in June of 2020. And I'm not sure if that happened or not, but you can expect that sometime in the next few years, there will be significant cybersecurity requirements that you will have to have a third party verify that you've passed.
I think there's already some stuff that literally just by signing onto SAM that you are complying to. So you'll see when you go through the sam.gov application that there's some, there's 8 pages of FAR requirements that you have to commit to. And if you don't, you just, it's a non-starter, for a conversation. So again, just understanding what those are and having a legal team or a consultant just explain
the
that.
Cornell Law website is really, really good at, listing out FAR regulations and, also explaining I'm 5. I've looked up a lot of FAR and a lot of CFR things on there. I highly recommend it. I even donated $5 to them once, because they're so great.
That's awesome. Keep this page running.
Yes.
Make it a free resource. That's amazing. So in closing thoughts, there was a bunch of questions, or it seemed like a bunch of general misunderstanding or anxiety around contract terms and contract administration, protecting intellectual property. Do you guys have any best practice tips for negotiating contract terms or managing contracts once you are awarded, whether it be an SBIR or a prime or a subcontract?
Yeah, go hire Donnelly-Boland.
That's what I was gonna say. Yeah, no, I think that negotiations are hard. I don't want to speak to that in broad brushstrokes, but especially when it comes to applying for SBIRs and other sort of R&D grants and contracts, especially when it comes to contract management. yeah, like we do it all day, every day. I think we're one of the best in the country. There's probably 2 or 3 firms that can actually do it, and we're one of them. You know, I think that it is, even, you know, I wouldn't say, even if you're thinking about doing it, you're not quite sure, like just reach out. Like we're happy to like share any sort of quick advice and tips and tricks that we can, like, especially if you're local, especially if you're in Pittsburgh, especially if you're in the startup scene. You know, just reach out and we'll try and assist as best as possible. And then, like, you know, really when it comes down to like actually having contracts awarded and managing them, you know, I think that we offer a pretty high quality and pretty affordable solution to making that successful.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you both so much for your time and expertise. I think that this was a very useful webinar. I definitely took a lot of notes, and for everybody in the audience, we will be sharing your slides, correct, Chris?
That's I'll send you a PDF.
Cool. So we'll send that out as a follow-up to everybody who attended, and feel free to reach out to Chris or Olga. Their contact information will be in there as well.
Thanks so much, Matt. Really appreciate it. And the whole IW team.
Thank you.
Bye.
Have a good one, guys.